So now that we're in our exploration, you should see that this is our original portrait. Now let's look at the portrait in A. As I move this, what happens to the picture? So remember, we're taking some time to jot down in our notes just some ideas of the things that we notice. So if I look at A, it's moving horizontally, but what we notice is happening in the picture, okay? Let's jump to B. B is kind of different from the original picture, but as I move my zoom, what happens? So what's happening in B? Let's jot down what we notice is happening in B in comparison to my original picture. Also in my notes, let's see what's happening in C. C, what's our noticeable difference with the start of C from my original picture? What do I notice about C? D is also kind of different. What did we notice originally? And as I use this scroll bar, what's happening? And last but not least, let's look at E. E is probably the most different. What's happening? So as you're finishing up jotting down your notes, I want to pose a question to the group. Which images are most like my original picture? And which are the least like the original? And then explain your reasoning. At this time, we're going to pause the video once again, and we're going to have two of you all respond to this question. Once again, which images are the most like the original? And which are the least like the original? So as I move back to our slide presentation, let's make sure that we're also answering these questions in the answer portion in our Pear Deck. Also, please make sure that if you can't type in the Pear Deck once again, that you're typing in the chat. So once again, the first question was, which images are most like the original, which are least like the original? And go ahead and type your response. The second question is going to be some of the sliders make the scale copies of the original portrait. Which of the portraits from A through E do you think are actual scaled copies? So you have our original portrait. If you had to make a guess of which ones were scale copies of it, which one would you choose? Or which ones would you choose between A through E? And explain your reasoning. And now, based off of that, what do you think a scale copy is? So once again, you want to type your response in the chat or type it in the Pear Deck slide, and I'll give you the questions one more time. The first question, which images are most like the original? Which images are least like the original? Our second question, which ones do you think are scaled copies of the original portrait? And the third question, what do you think scaled copy means? Let's pause the video here as you finish up. So let's tackle the first question. So some of the similarities that you may have noticed between pictures A through E are that all are based on the same original portrait, right? They all show the same boy wearing a blue shirt and brown hair, and they all have a white background. So that's easy to kind of notice. So if I think about some of the differences, they all have different sizes, some have different shapes. If I look at picture A, B, and E, they've been stretched or somehow distorted, right? But if I specifically look at C and D, they're not stretched or distorted, but each a different size than the original, okay? So C and D are going to be scaled copies based off of my second question. Remember, my second question was, which one of these are scaled copies? C and D would be scaled copies. So if you think about it, letter choice A, B, and E, if you look here on the screen, A, B, and E, they're not scaled copies because they have a change in shape. So for instance, if you look at picture A, this boy looks distorted from my original picture, right? Same in B and same in E. They have a change in shape compared to the original portrait. Portrait A is stretched vertically, so the vertical side is now much longer than the horizontal side. Portrait B is stretched out sideways, so the horizontal sides are now longer than the vertical. And in E, it seems to have its upper left and lower right corner stretched. So it's kind of being stretched diagonally in opposite directions. So the portrait is no longer a rectangle. And then if I look specifically at C and D, it's a larger copy or a smaller copy of the original portrait, but everything still remains the same. So hopefully this makes a little bit of sense. Now, the third question revisited that question about what is a scale copy. Now, this is important. I want you guys to write this in your notes. I want you to write a scale copy is a copy of a picture that changes in size but does not change in shape. I'll repeat it. Again, we're writing this in our notes as a definition. And once you write it down, if you have that highlighter present, let's make sure that you highlight it. So a scaled copy is a copy of a picture that changes in size but does not change in shape. We're going to pause the video right here, and I need one person to share out just to reiterate what the definition is of a scaled copy. Thank you so much for sharing. I also want you guys to write down the following. A scaled copy can be enlarged or reduced in size, but nothing else changes. So once again, a scaled copy can be enlarged or reduced in size, but nothing else changes. So now that we have our working definition, let's see if we can put it into practice. Let's look at the next slide. So we want to scale the letter F. So here it says, here's an original drawing of the letter F and some other drawings of that letter. The first thing that I want you all to do is to identify all the drawings that are scaled copies of the original letter F drawing and explain how you know. So you can type this in the chat. Identify all the drawings that are scaled copies of the original letter F drawing and explain how you know. Okay. We will also pause here and let you guys share out. But I want you guys to kind of figure out which one of these drawings is a scaled copy of the original. Remember, my definition says it can either be enlarged or reduced, but nothing else changes. So hopefully you guys have kind of looked at this a little bit closer. I have my original drawing. So if I look, the top part of this F is 2 units. The longer vertical stem is 1, 2, 3, 4 units. And then this short part is only 1 unit. So now paying closer attention to this original drawing, let's make sure we were right about what we said. Which one of these drawings between 1 through 7, which one of these are actual scale copies of my original? So once again, quickly identify personally which ones you think are going to be a scale drawing, and then we're going to move to the next slide. So now this is a Pear Deck slide once again. So I want you guys to write your response. Again, if you're not in Pear Deck, just go ahead and put this in the chat. So we're going to talk about it. Decide whether each of the 7 drawings is a scaled copy. Listen carefully to your peers and be prepared to share your strategy. So in your response, guys, you can use these sentence stems. Drawing blank is a scaled copy of the original, and I know this because, and then give me your explanation. You can use something like, when I look at the lengths, I notice blank, or when I look at the angles, I notice something else. So once again, use these sentence stems as an opportunity to write your response. So again, I'll go back just so that you can see one more time which one of these drawings are going to be scale copies of the original. So let's make sure that we're utilizing this time to either respond in the Pear Deck or to type in the chat. We're going to take 30 more seconds for you guys to type your responses, and we're going to pause the video here. Okay, now that we've had some time to respond and really think about this, let's make sure that what our thinking was correct. Okay, so again, the first question was to identify all the drawings that are scale copies of the original letter F and explain how you know this. So hopefully you realize that drawing number 1, drawing number 2, and drawing number 7 are scaled copies of the original drawing. So if you got at least one of those or all of these right, go ahead and give me a thumbs up. You can give me a thumbs up in the chat or give me a reaction on Zoom. So again, drawings 1, 2, and 7 were scaled copies of the original drawing, okay? And we know this because they're not stretched differently in one direction. They're enlarged evenly in both vertical and horizontal directions. And if I dive a little bit deeper, in the scaled copy, so again, 1, 2, and 7, every segment is the same number of times as long as the matching segment in the original drawing. So for instance, in drawing 1, it was just increased by, everything was increased by a unit in the beginning. So this first part was 2 units. This one stretches 1, 2, 3, okay? So again, all of it was the same number as times as long as the original segment. In the scale copies, again, all segments keep the same relationships as its original. So the original drawing of F is 4 units tall, right? Its top horizontal segment is 2 units wide, like we said before, 4 units tall, 2 units wide. And then the shorter horizontal segment is only 1 unit, that part in the middle, okay? In drawing 1, the F is 6 units tall and 3 units wide. And in drawing 2, it's 8 units tall and 4 units wide. And lastly, in drawing 7, it's 8 units tall and 4 units wide. And in each scale copy, the width is half of the height. Okay. So again, we should be able to notice that 1, 2, and 7 were the scaled drawings. So remember, we had to examine all the scale copies more closely, specifically the lengths of each part, and talk about how they were compared. So with knowing that, we should be able to see the obvious differences between 3, 4, 5, and 6. We should see the noticeable difference between those and how they're not scale copies. Now, before we wrap up, I want to discuss this last question with everybody. How do the other copies fail to show these features? So we just mentioned it in the slide before that drawing 3, drawing 4, drawing 5, and drawing 6 were not scale copies. Let's hear about 2 or 3 of you guys share what are the obvious differences, and you can pick either one of the drawings, 3, 4, 5, or 6. What are some of the obvious differences between those 4 drawings, 3, 4, 5, and 6, from the original? So let's take about 2 minutes to pause the video here and share out. All right, so this is going to be our exit ticket for today. And thanks again for everybody that has shared out in today's class. So we're going to wrap this up with an evaluation. So in your own words, you already wrote down what the definition of a scaled copy is, but in your own words, I want you to explain back to myself and Mr. Spencer, what is a scaled copy? We kind of did a lot of vague representations, but in general, what do we know a scaled copy is? And then the second question is, what are some of the characteristics of scaled copies? So this story map is a graphic organizer that can be used to help you all identify important elements of the story. Again, we're going to do this in Pear Deck, so you guys can use the typing tool to fill in these boxes to answer these questions about what is a scaled copy and what are some characteristics of scaled copies. So again, we're going to take about a minute and 30 seconds. We're going to pause the video here for you guys to answer this question. And again, if you can't type in the Pear Deck, go ahead and put your response in the chat. Last but not least, it's time to close out today's lesson. So the first thing that I want you guys to do, and you can do this again in your Pear Deck slide, just write 1 to 2 sentences about what you learned from today's discussion. Let's just summarize what you learned from today's discussion, okay? As you guys are doing that, I'm also going to talk about your independent activity for today. Your independent activity is going to be a scavenger hunt of your online textbook. Really, really simple. All of the directions are going to be posted for you in Google Classroom. So it's extremely important that today you do have an independent activity. You had a break on Thursday and Friday. So this assignment will be graded as an independent activity, and it is in Google Classroom. Once again, it is due today at 11:59 p.m. You have plenty of time to finish this before your next mod, or you can finish it before the end of the day. Okay. Last but not least, I thank you guys for being extremely participatory in class today and collaborating with your peers. If you have any questions, we will hang on after this video to make sure that we answer any questions that you may have. But again, we want to make sure that you answered this summary question, what you learned from today's discussion. You can write it in the Pear Deck slide or in the chat. And if there are no more questions, thank you guys so much for joining us today. And you guys can go ahead and sign off and say goodbye to your peers and have a great rest of your day.